All right, so kind of another burnout talk, but I think mine will be more focused on SLOs. Chris definitely gave a great talk yesterday, and we'll be building off of that a bit. My name's Michael Shen. I work at Red Hat. I suppose I should just go to the next slide. I work at Red Hat. I'm a site reliability engineer there. I work on OpenShift mostly. If you haven't heard of OpenShift, I think that's Kubernetes. And kind of a fun fact, I'm kind of one of those people, the first time they get a laptop, I'll just turn the slider on the temperature of the monitor all the way to warm. So I thought I'd share that with you guys today. um, but let's get started. So in this talk, there's kind of a blurb in the abstract, but the main points we'll be talking about are kind of pitfalls when you're setting SLOs, and kind of how avoiding or coming out of these pitfalls can help us as developers understand the system better and also reduce our own burnout. So first, kind of like, what's an SLO? I know there was a session yesterday about differentiating, like what's a DevOps engineer, what's an SRE, what's a platform engineer. For myself, one of the hallmarks, I guess, of an SRE is working with SLOs. For better or worse, an SLO, just the by the book definition, Juna yesterday had also shared about the Google SRE book. I've just pulled it straight from there. It's just a target value, and you have to have an indicator, and it's just whether you're hitting this target or not. And as an example, with OpenShift, with Kubernetes that I work on, a very common SLO you may see in the wild is like the Kubernetes API server is available 99.95% of the time. Now, just at face value, this SLO isn't very helpful. There's kind of more that needs to happen behind the scenes. For example, what does it mean for a Kubernetes API server to be available? It has to be working somewhat, right? So there are more definitions that go into it, but for the sake of what is an SLO, you can think of it this way: just something is available or working X% of the time. But I'm not really here to talk only about SLOs. It's helpful to think about like why SLOs are useful, or I don't know how many SREs are in the room, but I bet there are more people who are not SREs. Even if you don't work with SLOs, the importance of the SLO really goes back to these kind of three ways of DevOps. If I could get like a quick show of hands, how many of the people in the room have read the DevOps handbook or the Phoenix project? Yeah, pretty much everyone, which is great. If you haven't, highly recommend it. It's, I think, one of the cornerstones of of DevOps, really. And with SLOs, it's no exception. If I'd help motivate it, there's three main ways of DevOps that are kind of shared in those two books, other places as well. But the first way is basically maximizing flow or output between the left side and the right side, whether it's development to operations or whether it's the business to customers. Focus on like how can I maximize flow, kind of get rid of waste. The second way is to kind of focus on amplifying feedback. Is what I'm delivering useful? Is something breaking? I want to know as fast as possible. And finally, there's kind of building a culture of continuous learning and experimentation. Now that things are flowing, I'm getting feedback. How can I keep improving this system? How can I keep learning? And SLOs really focus on, I think it's the latter two. SLOs can really help give fast, relevant feedback. If in a perfect world, you could kind of sit down with all of your customers, right? Ask, what's working, what's not, what do you like, what do you not like, kind of like the DORA report does. But, with all of your customers. But at a certain scale, you just can't do that anymore, right? You don't have the time. Customers, maybe they don't have the time either. So you have to take some kind of guesses. What's important for customers? What's working? What's not working? You need to know. And so SLOs can help you define what feedback loops you feel are important to customers. This also lets you optimize for other downstream consumers. Let's say your customers are like an internal team in your company. If you set SLOs, you can help the other internal team within the company understand what service you're providing, right? What expectations they should have of you, and they can continue building on that. And finally, this builds into the third way, culture of continual learning, because with all of this targeted, useful feedback, you can tune areas of the system you want to focus on. So if I take the previous example, if we have an SLO of the Kube API server being available, if we're meeting that generally, then we know, okay, we don't really need to focus too much engineering efforts on availability. We can maybe focus on something else. But if we aren't meeting availability, then it's a very clear signal, okay, this is one area of our product we should take a look at. But some of you may be here just for the story. And so I mentioned earlier, I'm a site reliability engineer at Red Hat. We work on a managed Kubernetes platform. And one of the difficulties that I have found while working on this system is customers want to use Kubernetes in very different ways. If you give one customer a Kubernetes cluster, they may use it one way. You give another customer a Kubernetes cluster, and they may be just trying to break it, just for fun, right? You never know what a customer will do with a Kubernetes cluster, and so I found it's very difficult for us to set SLOs even and define what alerts we want, because one customer's working cluster may be another customer's broken cluster, and it's kind of difficult. And what we had found is very recently, our on-call S3 team, we were dealing with around 7.5 pages per hour for like sustained, not like a spike, it was just like regular day to day. And that's roughly like dealing with a page every 8 minutes. So you can think of like, you get paged, you take a look at the cluster, right? Any dashboards, any metrics or logs, and then 8 minutes later, if you haven't figured it out, you get paged about a different cluster, a different problem. And it really reminded me of, this very common story of a frog in boiling water. There's the idea of that if it starts in a cold pot of water and you gradually raise the temperature, the frog never notices until it's too late. Now, I've heard that this is actually fake. Like, the frog will jump out, but I don't know. Maybe they're smarter than us. We definitely weren't jumping out, and it was something that snuck up on us. We didn't start out with 7.5 alerts per hour, but it's something that just gradually kept creeping up until it was really unmanageable. And there are a couple reasons for this. The main ones that I want to share are that many of the pages we were getting were not truly actionable. So I mentioned it was difficult for us to determine what we wanted to page on. One of them is, for example, if one of the cluster's nodes was running or not. Now, some customers are very eager to auto-scale, very eager to save money, so they're very proactive with shutting down nodes. And it's difficult to find out, is there a problem with the cloud provider? Is there a problem with the cluster? or is it just the customer's performing some actions? And that was one of the reasons we somewhat could work on a page every 8 minutes, because, you get paged for a node going down, take a quick look, oh, the customer shut it down, and then you can move on to the next page. The second reason I would say is that our attempts to modify SLOs were often met with some resistance. Not a lot of resistance, but just enough so that we could keep putting it off. When there were questions come up, hey, do we really need our SLO to be this high? If we just took a step back, we could cut down on alert volume. It was often met with, well, isn't that just making our product worse? Won't customers be unhappy? And it's a bit subjective, right? No one could say yes or no in either way. And the third reason I would say is that other internal teams, let's say like the business side or the sales side, couldn't understand that, or couldn't see that there was a problem with the SRE team. From their side, they're able to keep selling clusters. Customers seem to be relatively happy, but the SRE team was pretty underwater, dealing with 8 pages per hour, 7.5. But during all this, a lot of the SREs on the team were actually okay, like in the sense that somehow or some way, with the 1 or 2 SREs on call, they could deal with 7.5 pages per hour. Like, they could physically do it. We're generally on call 1 week at a time, so it's not like someone's full job always responding to pages, but in some sense, we were just frogs in a pot of boiling water. If it was most obvious to us when like junior or newer engineers joined our team, because they would very quickly not be able to keep up with the paging volume. And over time, that's really what led us to kind of focus on this problem. So in addition, I missed the segue. These situations obviously cause burnout for a lot of the members of our team. So I can speak to myself. Being on call during the time was very physically exhausting. You can't focus on anything, right? You get a page, you have to respond, you have to log in, figure something out, 8 minutes later, context switch, and it starts again over and over. And our shifts are generally like 5 hours. So on a normal shift, when we're on call, after the 5 hours, there's kind of time to catch up on email, review some PRs, help out some other team members. But I remember very clearly during this period of time that every time I was on call, I was completely wiped after the 5 hours. Could not do anything else. And to the second point, there was a lot of feeling that our product just sucked. And for that reason, it was just very demotivating to work on the product at all. Like, you're getting paged so much. It's just like, there's so many things broken. Why is anyone even using our product? Right? There's a lot of those kinds of feelings, and it was kind of growing in the team. And I think realizing there's a problem. It sounds kind of silly because now that I say it seems very obvious, right? 7.5 pages per hour, but realizing that, okay, we have a problem within the SRE team, we need to do something, was a big driver here. And so the first pitfall we kind of identified was having impossible SLOs. And the idea, what I mean by having an impossible SLO is being unable to differentiate misconfiguration, like an allowed misconfiguration from a broken system. And this was really troublesome for us because customers are free to kind of modify their cluster after they install it. And that can include modifying network firewalls on their cloud provider, running applications, running DR tests. So we began to start to roll back some of these alerts that weren't fully under our control, and basically started working to remove SLOs until we were confident that we could fully control them and largely consider all of the edge cases in determining what's a valid or invalid page. And this is something that you can kind of see in the SRE book as well. They talk a lot about identifying what a valid request is or an invalid request. But it's very difficult to see in the moment, I think, until you run into it. The second pitfall I think we fell into was bureaucracy around SLO changes. So we often had to find or convince the right people to make any change. So even adding an SLO or adjusting the value or removing it. And I want to clarify what I mean by bureaucratic. Dave yesterday spoke about the Western organizational culture and how it relates to the door metrics. One of the types, so there's pathological, bureaucratic, and generative. When we were reflecting kind of internally, we felt, at least in our SLO process, we were a very bureaucratic organization. Now, I'd say there are parts of our organization that were generative, right? But at least in the SLO process, bureaucratic pretty much nailed the process. And there are many aspects to organizations, and I've linked the paper below. I would encourage everyone to take a look as well. One of the aspects I wanted to focus on was awareness. So within the organization, the paper defines awareness as when there are conscious efforts to keep team members informed about the variables that affect their efforts. This was not happening. So this is not happening at all. We were very constricted. The SRE team kept like paging volume to ourselves, not on purpose, but it's just like we would widely share within our own teams, but it was hard for us to share with other teams. And likewise, when the business, has their own metrics about how things are going, they also weren't sharing with SRE teams. So it's very difficult for us to be on the same page where the business team thinks everything's going well and the SRE team thinks everything is going so poorly. A lot of the initial meetings, there was just a lot of miscommunication. And the Western organizational cultures focus on information flow. So we really experienced that firsthand where it was hard for us to communicate information within the organization about this problem. And what we've been working on since then is getting the business and SREs looking at the same SLOs and alerting on SLOs that we can all agree on. One thing, for example, that the business team is interested in is how many new cluster installs are happening, right? How much more money are we making? And the SRE team was really overburdened, I think, by figuring out why clusters wouldn't uninstall in certain edge cases. So that was one example, I think, of where the SRE team was able to focus on, what the business cares about, which is installing more clusters, instead of getting bogged down on a lot of edge cases that they matter, but the business doesn't care as much about. But the third pitfall, I think is arguably the most important, is how we ignore developer well-being over customer experience. And I say ignored because I think in some sense it's important to value customer experience, right? But we can't ignore our own well-being for that. Chris had mentioned this yesterday in his talk as well about burnout, where if you're always skipping lunch, right, always working long hours, it's not good, right? It's not good for us. It's generally not good for those around us as well, like our families, and it's not really sustainable long term. And for what benefit, right? So it's important to be aware of our own well-being when setting SLOs, and not just kind of continue to add SLOs, continue to try to improve some numbers just for the sake of customer experience. So what we did here is we actually set like an internal meta SLO for our team. Initially, we set the goal like, let's cut it in half. Let's say our goal is 3 pages per hour, right? And then when we meet that, we can always improve, because 3 pages per hour even might seem very high. I think I'm still kind of holding out for 1 page per 4 hours, but we'll get there, right? But the idea is like getting, along with the other pitfalls, getting the other teams to agree, like, okay, to build a scalable service, we need a healthy SRE team. Like we can't keep supporting more clusters if the SRE team is getting paged more and more. So agreeing on like what's like kind of a healthy team, we're working on it. But for now, 3 pages per hour is our goal, and we've made a lot of progress there. And so in review, like I would say that there's really just pitfalls everywhere. So even if you follow the Google SRE book, even if you follow like what is assumed to be like the path of best practices, there are a lot of pitfalls there. There are a lot of pitfalls off of the path too. And I think it's really important to keep in mind like why we're doing what we're doing, what the kind of spirit of DevOps is. And that's why I kind of tried to bring it back to the 3 ways of DevOps. I don't think SLOs are kind of a magic bullet, right? Like we had SLOs and we're getting flooded with alerts. It's really the ability to focus on maximizing flow, right? Which feedback do we care about? We were obviously giving too much feedback, and not all of the feedback was useful. And being able to continuously improve on that feedback. And so I would say, though, that kind of the 3 main pitfalls we learned from, and I hope that you all could learn from as well, is that definitely if you set SLOs, don't set it or don't alert on it until you're confident you can exclude invalid requests. Just requests that you don't care about if they fail, for a lack of a better term. Work towards a generative Western culture. There's a lot that goes into that. And so I'd really refer you to the paper. It can sound kind of scary as a research paper, but it's like 3 pages. It's not that bad. And the third one, I think was really useful for us, is setting kind of a team health SLO. Yeah, how much can you like healthily or safely get paged before hey, we need to swarm, we need to pull an end-to-end corridor, raise it as a kind of major team health problem. And with that, I think talk is basically over. I would say that the last point is that SLOs are something that we write and it's good to have SLOs that work for us, as well as measure the customer experience. So I have some links in the back of the slides, but I think that's my talk.